Welcome. Welcome. I am Elizabeth Gregory. I'm the director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program here, and this is the Barbara Carkeby Living Archive series sponsored by the Friends of Women's Studies. The Friends of Women's Studies support the WGSS program here at U of H, and they host the Table Talk Luncheon, which honors women of accomplishment in many industries. In Houston in March, this year's Table Talk will be March 28th, if you're interested. And they also support through expertise and outreach the Carrie C. Shewart Women's Archive and Research Collection here in the library, which collects the papers of Houston area women's organizations and individual women who've made history and herstory here in Houston. So if you're interested, it's possible to get a tour of the archive in special collections on the second floor, which is always fun. But I wanted to welcome you specifically to, today is the first in this year's Living Archive series, and our topic for this year is Food for Gendered Thought. So we'll be having 4 different panels on issues of food, and the next one is scheduled for January 30th, and it's called Food and Sex. So I can't tell you anything more about that panel, but it's right before Valentine's Day. It should be interesting.
I'll come back to that one.
We'll know more. But for today, our topic is the politics of food and family, the healthy food movement, and we're really excited to have a great panel with us today. And I'm just going to refer you to the bio sheets of all of the panelists, and I'll mention all their names and titles, but for more information, please refer to your list. Bettina Elias Eagle is a nationally recognized writer and commenter on matters relating to children and food policy, and also a very active blogger. And she's now writing a book. Gwen Simms, next to her, everybody has their name in front of them so you can tell, is the Director of Nutrition and Chronic Disease Prevention at Harris County Public Health, which serves our county, the 3rd most populous county in the U.S. Betty Wiggins is one of the foremost authorities on school nutrition and food service management, and we are lucky that she is now the Officer of Nutrition Services for Houston Independent School District, the nation's 7th largest school district. So we have we're very large in this area. So they will be sharing their insight, and our moderator, who will also share her insight as part of the process, is Dr. Daphne Hernandez, who is Assistant Professor of Nutrition, Obesity Studies, and Health Disparities here at the University of Houston. So please join me in welcoming our panel. We're honored to have them here.
Well, thank you for showing up today. I'm very excited to see a lot of students, particularly my students, thank you, and faculty. I know it's the end of the semester and it's sometimes hard to get one more thing into the schedule. While the next talk apparently is food and sex, and that may be a little bit more exciting than food and family, I promise you this will be an exciting panel. I want to start off by having you think of a positive memory that you have with food. When you have that memory, raise your hand. Okay. Now, how many of you does that memory include family, excluding this past week of Thanksgiving, which I know could have maybe rocked your world? Okay, so for most of us, food and family go hand in hand. I know for me, it goes hand in hand. Not only did I grow up with my parents, but I was fortunate enough to grow up with my grandmother, and specifically my memories of my grandmother are her in the kitchen. And from a little girl, I watched her cook, and that then eventually evolved into my interest of cooking All the holidays are about the food, enough food to feed our family 4 times over. Now today, I cannot leave my mom's house without at least 1 or 2 meals in tow. So food is very interesting. So food is very much a part of my life. It's now transcended into my research. But I study the opposite. I study the lack of food. I study food insecurity. And I think one of the reasons that I gravitated to that was because of it's an experience that I didn't have. So a lot of my topics that I study are things that I didn't experience, and so I'm very curious about how families cope with such experiences. So I'm going to open it up to the panelists to describe their relationship with food and family and how either one of these or both of these factors have contributed to your current line of work. Yeah, we can go whoever, but you need to push the button. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Or do I have to use my cafeteria voice? Which one? Both of them are available to me. My name is Betty Wig, as she said, and as far as food and family, I was raised on a farm in southeastern Michigan. Being an African American, whenever I tell people I'm raised on a farm, they ask, what part of the South are you from? And I say southern Michigan. Totally different kind of farm experience. I raised in an area where there was a lot of greenhouses, a lot of corn, a lot of soybeans, a lot of vegetables, and a lot of pigs. And so I did not know I was eating free-range chickens. I didn't know I was eating all of this organically grown food because we never put fertilizers on our food. Food that went to market did got a little fertile, but we never did. My mother canned preserved food. So hunger was something that I was not aware of. Had no association with it at all. And even now, again, you talk about race and diversity and disparity. Whenever someone talks to me, they'll say, well, as a child, you know, African American, you had that hunger experience. I'm like, no. We had an experience where we had an abundance. And I also had the experience of being raised around a lot of commercial farmers, and I saw what happened to farm crops that didn't have a secondary market. So I got very interested in providing farmers with a secondary market, and that's what the Farm to School program does initially. That people really realize it's not about school gardens. You just kind of put that on to be nice. Debbie Stabenow was my state senator, and she was very smart about it. That farm bill, that farm to school bill, was really to support local farmers. So that's how my relationship, and as I gotten older and gotten engaged in food after I found out healthcare was not, being a healthcare dietitian really did not make much sense, since people had no respect for dietetics in terms of the role it played in a healthy model. They only, in a sick model. And I got into child nutrition. So my relationship with food started in school lunch in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is not exactly high, free, and reduced. It's kind of like River Oaks, kind of downsized by 12 times. But so very, very home University of Michigan. So
go blue.
Yay. I would, well, we can talk later. But, and in that, I didn't see any hunger. Well, I moved to Paterson, New Jersey. Lean on me. I worked in that school district where I did see hunger. And I saw families who were struggling. And I understood a lot of kids were coming to school hungry. School breakfast was there. We started doing things to support kids. And I really recognized that I wasn't supporting kids as much as I was supporting families. Income insecurity. Anytime a family is income insecure, the first thing that goes first is the quality of the food. And the second thing that goes is the quantity. So I started seeing all these programs for school breakfast, school lunch, school supper, summer feeding as a way of supporting our families and providing them with the dollars they need to feed their children. And then I looked a little closer because I'm from Detroit. And you guys had Harvey down here. We now had Harvey, and that's a natural disaster. Wait till you see an economic disaster. 2008, wait till you see a city dump out 50% of the housing is foreclosed on, jobs. there was more U-Hauls leaving here coming to Houston and Dallas and all points south, and that we were just left there. So we had a lot of households who had, quote unquote, those good paying jobs that they disappeared. So I started worrying about the kids at the end of the cul-de-sac. No one talks about those kids. And those are the kids that are subject to lunch shaming. So my interest in food, and is that I want to understand the role that high-quality food plays in academic achievement, and foremost than anything, the role that the school meals program plays in those households who may become income insecure. And that we should still be, making sure that a good meal, just like CHIP in healthcare, do you know good nutrition? The good doctor tell you good nutrition promotes good health. So that's where my interest lies, in ensuring that our families are supported and our kids are fed good food.
Hi, good afternoon. So again, my name is Gwen Simms, and I've actually been working at Harris County Public Health. It'll be 21 years in January, so I've been in Houston-Harris County for quite a while. But I'm initially from Louisiana. I'm actually what they call Opelousas, Louisiana, but I actually grew up and went to high school at Plaisance, and was in the presence of my grandparents, and really I consider myself raised in my grandmother's kitchen. My grandparents grew up on a farm, so my mom was one of 9 siblings. And when I was born, my mom was still called back to the farm to help with harvesting. Eventually, my grandparents decided to move closer to the city, not in the city of Opelousas. And my grandfather continued to have a garden, and not just, when we talk about gardens, sometimes we talk about this little corner of our backyard. No, I'm talking about half of his backyard. So he continued to plant turnips and corn and okra. How many people in here like okra? Good, good. I see some okra lovers. That's not a favorite vegetable of a lot of people if you're not brought up with it. But so I grew up watching my grandmother cook, and I also grew up watching convenience sort of take over some of the meals that our family was fed, particularly on holidays when you have 9 children, and that was just on my mother's side. My father was one of 9 siblings as well. But when you're coming together from the holidays, you see that convenience starts to take a role and have a seat at the table. I think, like Ms. Wiggins, I never remember being hungry because there was always something to pull out of my grandfather's garden, which he actually kept up until he not only was diagnosed with Parkinson's, but it began to take a toll on his body. My first interest really in nutrition came in college, and that grew when I was in a dietetic internship in Inglewood, Colorado, where we actually helped to open their 7th WIC clinic for Tri-County Health Department. And I really began to see things from 2 sides, and that's really my passion now, in that looking at helping kids and helping adults to have a healthy weight, because we have a problem on 2 sides of the spectrum. On one side, it is overweight and obesity in terms of having the wrong kinds of foods and not enough physical activity specifically for our children. But on the other side of that spectrum, we still do have underweight kids and underweight teenagers because they don't get enough food to eat. So it's not just about providing that food, but it's also about providing nutritious food. And as we continue to have discussions here today, you'll see that in the work that I do in a collaborative called Healthy Living Matters, which I'm the co-project director for, as well as some of the activities we engage in with our partners and the activities that we have and we're expanding at Harris County Public Health.
I'm Bettina. Is this on? Okay. I'm Bettina Elias Eagle. And it is literally true. I would not be sitting here today if it weren't for that intersection between food and family. I'm a former New York City corporate lawyer. My ambition after I gave up the law to stay home with my kids was to become a freelance women's magazine writer. Like, I mean, the idea that I'm sitting here today was not on my radar at all 7, 8 years ago. But what happened is I did have kids, and you know, I was raised in a house where my mom in the 70s was very ahead of her time. You know, we had the compost heap, and had organic gardening, and my mom was reading all, you know, like Adele Davis and all those, like, you know, natural food gurus of the 70s. So I came to having kids with what felt like a pretty good grounding in nutrition, and I thought, this is not going to be a challenge to feed my kids well. But I think, like a lot of parents out there, when you suddenly have the sole responsibility of nurturing a human and feeding them, you start to see our food environment very differently. It's like a lens through which you see everything, and you start to realize there's so many forces working against what's just ought to be a pretty modest, you know, goal of I just want to feed my child well and raise a healthy eater. So, you know, for example, we live in an environment where we're bombarded all the time by junk food and fast food and processed food advertising, you know, very enticing advertising, very sophisticated advertising. And it's easy to kind of just take that for granted until it's your kid being very specifically targeted by that industry in really insidious ways, like using the cartoon characters they love, you know, and doing it at ages where they're literally too young to know they're being advertised to. So they are like the ultimate psychological sitting duck. You know, when you see that happening, you start to question, like, should our world be ordered this way? That, you know, my son is playing an online game called Pop Tropica that they promote to parents as being safe, you know, a safe learning environment. So I never bothered to even look at it, and I didn't know that in order to advance from one game to the next, he had to engage in a little challenge sponsored by, you know, Apple Jacks or Tootsie Pops, you know, here he's like 6 or 7. So stuff like that, or you know, we walk into an Office Depot or a Home Depot, and there's rows of candy at the checkout counter, and we all just sort of take that for granted now, and yet that's completely incongruous. That's not a food store, and yet there it is. And suddenly, when you have a little kid tugging at your you know, purse, saying, "Why aren't we buying that?" You start to see that differently. So you know, these were issues that were all kind of floating around in my head. They certainly wouldn't have tipped me into the work that I now do, but. When my kids were in early elementary school in Houston ISD, in 2010, I was asked if I would join a committee that had been formed of parents to advise our school food department on its menus. And one of my charter member friends is here, Stephanie. So, you know, we went to this meeting in 2010, and at that time, I really knew nothing about school food except that I did not want my kids eating what I saw in the cafeteria. This was pre-Betty, and it was pre-Obama Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. So the food was pretty abysmal in my opinion. And, you know, so I was packing a lunch every day for my kids. School food was not in any way a necessity. I almost felt like I shouldn't even go to the meeting because my kids weren't participating in the program until someone said to me, well, if the food were better, I'm sure you'd be glad to forego packing a lunch every day. And I said, yeah, that's true. So I went to the meeting, and it was really, it's like you can look back and go like, that's the second my life changed, you know. I mean, it was truly like a life-changing moment because they gave us this little presentation. It was like School Food 101, and a lot of information was conveyed, but 2 things really stuck in my head. The first, they asked us to guess how many kids in HISD qualified for free or reduced price lunch. In other words, they lived close enough to the poverty line to qualify. And people were throwing out numbers, and when the number was 80%, I was shocked. And I look back now sort of with shame that I didn't even know that, but I was shocked that the vast majority of my fellow HISD parents were reliant on this food that I was deeming, you know, unacceptable for my kids, but they really had no choice economically. And that suddenly made this issue of school food have tremendous urgency and importance for me. Like, you know, we needed to raise the bar on school food in this district. And then the other thing that came out of that meeting, it's just a small anecdote. We had just started the in-class breakfast program in HISD. It had been started somewhat under the gun because we'd had a new superintendent come, and this was the first thing he wanted done was to move breakfast out of the cafeteria into the classroom. And they sort of scrambled to put together this menu. But what we learned was, and Stephanie, I know you remember, I mean, it was just like awful food. It was like bright blue Trix yogurt and honey buns and, you know, just really sugary processed stuff. And then in addition, every day kids had to take a packet of animal crackers with the meal. And I was so confused, and I raised my hand. I'm like, why do they have to take animal crackers? And basically cookies every morning. And the answer was, well, that's how we're going to get the iron that they need through the fortified white flour in the cookies. And I was just like, so, those two facts, the 80% of people relying on this, and what kind of system produces that result, that cookies are okay at breakfast, that got me really interested. And I started to learn more about school food, and coupled with my interest in writing, that led me to start a blog called The Lunch Tray about all of these issues, children and food in our society, and school food in particular, and that's what led me here today.
So a central theme that I'm seeing through all of our work is all of us grew up in the form of having exposed to natural food, not so much to processed food. We've definitely moved away from that as a result of part of it of convenience and the need to improve. And another central theme was how our children are commercialized at a very young age. And they're good. Businesses are good on how they hook our children and get them interested in Pop-Tarts and Twinkies and all sorts of things. But the next question comes out of what was discussed today. It's also what was discussed in my class of how much is it the responsibility of schools versus family to teach children healthy eating? And how can schools, is there a way that schools can involve gardening, cooking classes to make either smarter lunchrooms or, so I'm conflicted on whether it should be the schools that should be exposing our children, or should we leave this to families? Our tax dollars are going to schools, so in some way we can argue that it is schools' responsibility because we're paying, in some way we're paying. But how much is that, should that be just a family, leave it up to the family? And we can also extrapolate it to the workplace, like how much is it that it's the workplace responsibility to have healthy food for us, like vending machines and things like that.
That sounds like a lunch lady question. Really, I have to tell you that the reason that how many of you know why the Child Nutrition Program was started? It started as a national defense effort, that we couldn't even raise healthy cannon fodder to fight the wars and the conflicts that we're in now. And then it was going along swimmingly, and then they decided that the United States Department of Agriculture became a commodity removal program. It was going along some of us who remember the wonderful 70s and the lady downstairs with the hairnet making the pizza and the macaroni and cheese and stuff like that. That was all great because a lot of the school lunch program was subsidized. That's the reason your parents only had to pay a quarter. And health wasn't an issue because we still had mamas in the kitchen cooking the same things that they were eating in school. Well, I'm that first-generation parent that had a job, and I felt really bad because I was a dietitian. I was taking my kid to McDonald's because I couldn't put it all in. I just didn't have enough time. And the consequences of all of that. And then our education system got to be more test-driven. They took out home economics, I'm sorry, that's the generation I'm from. They took out physical activity. So we started getting all these unhealthy children. And then we started the Institute of Medicine in 2009 said, look what we're doing to our children. And nobody kind of paid any attention to it. But then the Secretary of the Army said, we're not raising healthy children. We can't fight wars with a volunteer army. I was at a meeting in Washington, and there's a guy who's opposed to the Child Nutrition Program. I said, I tell you what, you don't want to support child nutrition, let's bring back the draft. And your healthy children can go. And we won't have to worry about feeding healthy children again. So the issue is that I think child nutrition is a right and not a privilege. I think that we should ensure that we have enough money, because how many of you know, I talk to parents this lady has really got a national reputation. In school lunch sections, we're scared to death of her because she speaks truth. She speaks truth, and she is our conscience, and I say that publicly. You prick our conscience, and I'm like, what got, got to, okay. So, but we do, she's moved the dime on a lot of things. You've caused a lot of people around this nation to change their approach. I know you've impacted a lot what I do at my program. Then I even also use your support. I'm Patina writing about it. So we've changed a lot of stuff, but the quality of the food that we serve children off of $3, that's all we get. None of our customers walk up to a cash register and say, we tell them the lunch is $2.25. They don't flip a $10 bill and say keep the change. We have to feed kids off of less than $3 because of this thing called eligibility, and we can talk about CEP later. It is a big effort for us to feed children healthy. Most of us who are in this started out as home ec teachers. I started home economics. We started out as dietitians. We know what, and then I also got more involved in it as a guilty mom who used to cook hamburger helper because I didn't have time. The economy had taken me out of the house. I didn't have time. But I was aware in this, I throw in some fresh fruits and vegetables and stuff and cook, on Saturdays and Sundays. So a lot of this that you talk about families, the economy changed how we feed our kids. The ready-eat cereals changed. I'm from Michigan. Tony the Tiger was born in Battle Creek, Michigan, him and Toucan Sam. And you talk about advertisement. We did counter advertisement. We chased Tony the Tiger out of town. Out of Detroit, and sent him back down I-94 to his hometown of Battle Creek, Michigan, which significantly, but then I told my parents we would no longer use sugar-coated cereals or reduce, so we started buying kachi and started doing whole grains. All of that costs money. But luckily, I was in a system where I was one of the first school districts in the nation that won 100% CEP. So I could sit down as a business person. Do you know how smart a business person we have to be? Do you all know how much revenue the HISD generates on an annual basis feeding children? $124 million. But from that $124 million, we had to support 2,840 employees with good paying jobs, not what you want, but good paying jobs. We have to support trucks. We have to do our part to support activities that occur in the school. So out of that money, say that's a lot of money, but not when you think about we only have $1.15 that we can allow to feed children. So no, there's not enough money in the program. But one of the things I tell people they did, they hired me as a menu planner, and we make ends meet some sort of way so that we will have clean label food. We actually have chicken with a bone. Is it the responsibility of schools? I say, yeah, if we are here to support education. Is it the responsibility of the community to make sure we have what we need? Yeah, if you're interested in good health for the kids and interested in raising a good army and good health.
I mean, I just want to echo wholeheartedly everything Betty said, and I also just want to raise the point that you asked, like, is it the home's responsibility or the school's? At the very least, let's not have the school undercut what might be going on at home. And so there I'm speaking maybe even to the larger school food environment, not just what's going on in the cafeteria, which is, dramatically improved, but, junk food fundraising.
Oh, God.
What does it tell you when the PE coach has given you this little bit of nutrition education that he's required to give you, and then, his fundraiser for the team is we're going to sell donuts. There's all kinds of stuff like that going on in school. Or that teacher who gave you that little bit of nutrition education, if you were lucky enough to get it, now giving you candy rewards to keep discipline in the classroom. So, I would say, like, at the very least, let's not undercut at school what might be going on at home. And then the reality is, in many, many homes, there isn't, solid, healthy food and nutrition education because there's a lack of income and access and all of those issues. And so, again, as Betty said, I think healthy food is a human right. And if you don't even want to take that view and just want to look at it practically speaking, this is the next generation of Americans. And they are our workforce and our military, and we will be paying their health care bills, or their health care bills will be paid. So, even from a purely practical point of view, I can't see any argument for why we wouldn't want to have the healthiest food in school as possible.
From a perspective, you asked a question about Should schools be responsible? And my answer to that is yes. If nothing else, for the reason to improve academic success. We know that kids who don't eat nutritious foods or kids who don't do well academically. They have a decreased chance of doing well academically. And if we talk about what schools, when we go back to that business sense, and let's talk about what schools are in the business for. They're in the business to educate to the utmost of their ability. And to be able to do that, we need to improve the nutrition in schools. One of the things that we do at Harris County Public Health is for over a decade, we've run Harris County School Health Leadership Group. And so in Harris County, we have about 21 independent school districts, but we also have other independent school districts that join this group who meet once a quarter. And the topic there is to talk about how do we improve school health when, schools are not required to have that physical activity that's offered. We talk about, healthy vending and what are some strategies that schools do utilize to actually improve the health on their school campuses. The importance of this group meeting once a quarter is that they are having these discussions as to what they've done in their school district or this school district, and they're able to share those opportunities. So my answer to that is absolutely yes, to improve the academic success of all students, not just some of our students. The other thing I think that you mentioned had to do with worksite wellness. And worksite wellness is definitely a must, and it's for that sort of the same reasons that you're investing in the employees. If you want more productive employees, if you want employees who have less absenteeism, who are coming to work and they're not getting sick all the time, you want them to be more productive, then the idea there is to really invest in those employees by investing in their health, by actually, we're not talking about having a full-out employee wellness, worksite wellness, but just small changes can make a big difference. One of the things we've done at Harris County Public Health is we actually, in our main building, and now we're having this at other buildings, is we thought with some of the funding that we have, that we really needed to invest by placing a gym in the building. So we've started there. We're also engaging in a campaign called Sitting is the New Smoking, which is mainly geared for our employees. But it's for the same reason you do it for the children. You are investing so that you are more productive. If you are more productive, if you're happy, if you're healthier, then what else is going to come out of that? You also see behavioral and mental health impact of that. Emotionally, you are better. So that's my answer, to that particular question.
To me, that brings up a big issue, and I've been looking for a professor that may be interested in doing some studies. For 5 years, we started changing the menus in our school system to healthy food. I'd like to say I came from we did. In Detroit, I had the healthiest meals, as they said, in the nation, given the processes that we had to use. I'm interested in seeing, after 5 years of having my employees cook and prepare healthy menus, has it had any impact on their health? And I left Detroit before I got a chance. University of Michigan was going to kind of help me out to do that, because this is not only about changing how our children choose to select food, but the household. I got to do something about the address, because it's like going to a party and all of a sudden you're eating all, and then you got to go home and you got honey buns everywhere. You walk by the gas station, they got sugary sweet drinks, and God forbid don't go to Sam's Club and Costco's. I just think those are criminal places, because it's industrial size. They be throwing stuff up on the counter. But I wanted to see if it had any impact. So whatever we do on the trays in school, where we're teaching the kids, and there's so many federal programs that are allowing us to teach children, like Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. I was 100% CEP, so I didn't have to worry about those schools that had a little bit more money than the other kids, because I fed them all. I fed them all, and it had an impact that even they had Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Programs, because I just rolled them, I just fed them all. And that was the benefit of having universal feeding, that income difference And then when we did CEP in the high schools and feeding all the children, we saw participation go up to 16%. We took that stigma right away. And then we as Americans, you know, I just say like, okay, you all get upset, you know, and we're all liberal and we feel we should be, but we get at a cash register and we'll tell, now honey, what are you now, free? Well, okay. And everybody understand what the stigma is associated with that. But until we do some things with measuring and measurement, we can't make the arguments for extending funding. Is it really impacting what's happening at that address? Is it really changing what happens in that shopping cart? Because I tell suburbanites all the time, you live in a food desert. Yes, you do. If you didn't have that car that allowed you to go to 3 loops around, you would not have, you'd be living in a food desert. Because that's the way we are. We don't do local community-based stuff. It's all regionalized. So we start talking about, oh, they live in a food desert. Give them a car. That'd help a lot. Give them a car. Give them a good public transportation system. It'll help a lot. So sometimes I think the argument about food deserts is really about the transportation system. It's really about access. Because if I lived up in River Oaks, and I know where River Oaks is, I'm liberal, and I didn't have a car, I would be in a food desert because there's no local greengrocer sitting at the end of my driveway. There's nobody coming around selling. I've got to get in my automobile. So deal with those kind of realities. And the other reality is that the stores that do occupy the poor neighborhoods, the reason the quality of their food is not as good as it would be, you know what their insurance rates are? Do you know how the cost of doing business in a poor neighborhood? So they're not incentivized to provide, or they can't afford it. So, you know, deal with that. Deal with the politics of hunger as well. So that's the reason a lot of our families are shopping in gas stations. And they're doing cheap food. And then, you know, I was in a gas station the other day. I haven't seen it in Houston, but I've seen it in Detroit, where they have a basket of apples and bananas to get the last quarter. Understand? And I actually see people buying it for their children as opposed to buying chips. So again, I want you to measure the impact so that we can make good policy.
I would be interested in talking to you about measuring the impact.
I'd be right.
My grad student's also in the audience. She'll come up and talk to you too. So, okay. You know, this is a great lead-in to the next question about economics. Okay, so we all agree we need to be feeding our children better food, but all of that costs money. And so we started with free and reduced lunch, and now we have school districts who are providing free breakfast. You know, what's the economics behind this? How are we going to sustain this over time? How does that influence economics of a family and just overall the city of Houston? Like, how long can we sustain this? And if we then think about just not breakfast and lunch, we have after-school programs, Kids Cafe, and things like that that are feeding our children. So is this a good investment? And maybe you've already answered this as, you know, we need measurement. But how are we going to sustain this over time? And is there an answer to that that may not be?
I mean, we managed to pay for some wars over time, and either you pay me now or pay me later, but you're going to pay me. When I got a 6-year-old who his life expectancy is not the same as his grandmother's, and it's all related to diet, it's where we put our values. It's where we want to put our money. Right now, I'm telling you, this is the greatest town to eat. You got all kind of food here. I mean, I'm just having a great time here in Houston. But, so the reality is that, okay, it's good enough for us because we think that's important, but what about those little kids? To me, it's just simply you pay now or you're going to pay later. Doesn't it people get concerned that we can't even serve peanut butter anymore? The kids only can't, and that's because of the food system that we've exposed to them to. I can't serve fish. You know, so many things just wrong with our food system. because we have delighted to use living better through chemistry. And so, but a lot of people have recognized we need higher quality food for us as adults. And how can you do that and then look at a kid and not say we're going to finance that? I'm telling you, when the Secretary of the Army says we can't raise enough soldiers, it became an issue. The Healthy and Hunger-Free Act passed so quick it made your head spin. So we need to talk about and address that. And also the farmers. The farmers have got a nickel in this quarter too, because we, the Child Nutrition Program, can be the best place for access to locally grown fresh fruits and vegetables. Just think of that when you go to your next local restaurant where you pay $80 a plate for something, that I'm doing it with $1.15.
So I just want to add to that. You know, you ask if these programs are sustainable. I mean, they are federally funded, but then you get to that question of why is Betty forced to work with $1.15 for food? And a few years ago, I don't know if you guys remember, there was this photo set that was all over the internet, and it was like America's school food compared to all these other different countries. Do you remember this? It was from Sweet Green. I mean, these photos just went crazy viral, and everyone kept sending them to me because I write about school food, and they're like, you know, look at our terrible chicken nuggets compared to France's, you know, filet mignon or whatever. And it was starting to drive me crazy because we have this apples to oranges comparison. People are constantly comparing our school food unfavorably to other countries, but those countries invest. And I actually wound up writing about this and digging in. And in France, there's a sliding scale that parents pay based on means, but they can be paying as much as $7 a meal. So, you know, I mean, if Betty gets $7, it would be a different ballgame. So it really comes down to, at the federal level, why do we so undervalue child nutrition? Why are we talking about cuts to food stamps? Why are we, why, when the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act passed, you know, they had these new and greatly improved nutrition standards from the Institute of Medicine, but experts calculated that that would require an extra 10 cents per meal to cover, and they got 6. You know, why are we shortchanging children's health? I mean, you know, again, this is my unabashedly liberal point of view, but to me, as Betty said, it's an investment, pay now or pay later. So, you know, it's really a question of national priorities.
So I'm listening to both of you, and I really feel like it's also a question about prevention and talking about where do our values lie. For example, how many of you, raise your hand if you know you see an ambulance and a fire truck, do you know, how many of you know that there's an emergency somewhere when they're going off with blinking lights? Anybody? Okay. But when you look at the health of children and you look at the health of our nation, the health of our state, the health of our city, the health of our county, there's no red flashing lights going off when we're talking about prevention, when we're talking about investing in the future of employees, when we talk about worksite wellness, or when we're talking about investing in children by investing in what they're having to eat and the physical activity that they get. There's no flashing lights going on. But these things are very important, and they're important for us to invest in.
And the school gardens, which is important. And one of the reasons I think I'm here is because I was school gardens. In Detroit, I had 82 schools with gardens. I had a 2.5-acre farm, and we were working on a 17-acre farm. One of the things that we did was we raised heirloom vegetables. That's all we planted. And the reason we did that was to teach ethnodiversity. Contrary to what you think, Detroit is not 100% African American. We're about 18% Hispanic, largest Middle Eastern population outside of the Middle East. And by raising heirlooms, we were able to teach kids about differences. They all had the same value. When you teach a kid that all tomatoes aren't red, there's orange, and there's zebra stripe, and there's green. There's some that look like plums and some that look like pears, but they're all tomatoes. They all have value. So they started learning about the diversity in their communities as well. The other thing was to show them about having more than a consumer relationship with their food. If the children's going to lead us, we better train them. So they had more than a consumer relationship with their food. Also, we did things with raising farms. I had a high school farm program where the kids actually were owners of their own farm stand. So that kids, poor children in particular, had no problem with middle-class kids because they thought it was great to go out and work in the garden. But the kids who were in the inner city, I really had to pull teeth because they thought it was stupid labor. You know, and it didn't help around that some of my well-meaning friends were telling the black kids it's like sharecropping. Please. So we started farm stands for kids where they own their own business. They raised the transplants, they grew the products, they decided what to sell, they had to go out and get their own customers, and they got to keep the profit. So right now I got one kid at Alcorn, I got a couple of them at Michigan State University who are studying agriculture. Those are kind of things that we have to do, and I really believe the kids are going to lead us. And if you keep maintaining your community, keep giving, not just me, but those hundreds and thousands of other food service directors around the country, giving us ample funding. Don't let them cut it. Don't let them cut the fund. And one of the things that we really would like to see is commodities for breakfast. That would help. You talk about the after-school feeding programs. That's, again, a way of supporting families and academic achievement. Because with all the high testing going on during the day, the kids really don't have a time to develop skills. They're developing those skills in those enrichment programs that are over after that mandatory 54 minutes of telling them, to do this, do this. That's where you're learning. That's where the kids, how many of you are aware of the Saturday schools that we have going on now? And even Sunday schools, and that was those kind of, because a lot of the stuff in the classroom now is so focused on high-stake testing. Those kids need after-school meals because mama's working 2 part-time jobs already. You're talking about you're going to support families. And it's really a help to her that all she got to do is pick those kids up at 6:30, bring them home, give them a bath, put them to bed, so she can start, as they say in the neighborhood, her grind, her daily grind at 5 o'clock in the morning. There's just so many things that are complicated and involved in feeding children. And again, don't leave out that kid at the end of the cul-de-sac because his parents are working doubly as hard. And they have more financial responsibilities, whether they wanted to or not, of staying at the end of that cul-de-sac. And sometimes $2.50 lunch money is not what they have to get at kids, so that kid will go to school hungry. Or that working mother who had nothing to do with anything. She's a registered nurse. She's got 4 kids, and she can't come up with that 40 cents. But she's out there working. Or the poor mother that's working 2, 3 part-time jobs. Again, that's how we're going to support our families. It's about economics, and it's just not the black and the brown. There's a lot of white out there who, for political reasons, don't want the truth to be told about what's happening in their community. I lived near Grosse Pointe, Michigan, where the Junior League asked me to lecture one day. And so what I decided to do, because I knew they were going to talk about the poor kids of Detroit, and I just wasn't having it. And I went out and found out how many food banks were in churches in these neighborhoods that are on the St. Clair shores, the Detroit River, and stuff like that, and up in Oakland County. And it's because it was a reflection of the economy that was around in Detroit. So, be cognizant of the fact that's the reason we need to not have income as an issue. We need to talk about the viability and the health of our children. Because in all rich neighborhoods, you go to Sam's Club, and I think it's criminal what some of those parents be throwing, but that's what their dollars permit them to do. I'm sorry.
So this was mentioned earlier. One of the most current events has been Harvey, and we have been affected. We're still feeling the effects of Harvey. My question to the panel is, how has Harvey changed the landscape for food? One of the things that I observed, and I was shocked in a good way, was the amount of food distributions that occur right after Harvey, and the amount of and that occurred, so we had several centers that kept giving out food through October. We had SNAP-D come into play. We had all this food assistance, and so there was like this local attention on food. Will this be a short-term effect? Are we, do we keep needing to have natural disasters to get this type of attention in terms of food? Or, you know, how has Harvey changed the landscape? Or did it change it? Was this a temporary little bleep in our history?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I guess the first thing is, you know, I've been in Houston long enough to now be called a Houstonian, and I think I, like most of the people in this room, have never seen anything like Harvey. But I want to go back a little bit, if you will. Bear with me to give kudos to some of our Healthy Living Matters partners, Recipe for Success and Brighter Bites, whose co-founder, Dr. Shrila Sharma, is in the room right now. Groups like those two who recognize the food insecurity and food scarcity, if you will, in the Houston, Harris County area prior to Harvey. So there's a lot of things that they're doing. Partnerships for Success purchased, I think, around 2014, 7.5 acres of land over in Sunnyside. They're farming that property, so they have actual food markets or farmers market stands that they stand up. I know on the weekends, and I'm not sure what their schedule is during the week, but you can look them up. They also do a lot of educating not only children but families about nutrition education, about individual foods and how to incorporate those into healthy recipes. Brighter Bites is doing a lot by educating children with nutrition education classes. They help to do some training so that schools can implement CATCH, which is Coordinated Approach to Child Health. In addition to that, they do have programs that they sponsor at the schools, I think elementary and middle schools for sure, where the families are offered 2 bags of food per week for, I think it's 16 weeks. And then in the summer, I think they do this for 8 weeks. And that comes with a nutrition handbook for the parents where they can learn about nutrition and its importance. And it also comes with classes for the children. So these are things that they are already doing in the community. So it's not to say that none of the community health organizations or were aware of the food scarcity or of the food insecurity. But Harvey was something different, where immediately, once we began to bring businesses back online, communication back online, we knew that we had people in shelters. You had people in Houston and Harris County who were volunteering to bring food, to donate food, anywhere, anytime, any place. So it just really brought that needed awareness so that people do realize that it's not just in neighborhoods, though, that we consider food deserts where we had an issue, because when Harvey hit, we had an issue everywhere in Houston and Harris County in terms of getting access to food. So I think it definitely brought some realization to us about, in Houston and Harris County, about the importance not only of food, but also of nutritious food. Because, you know, we all know that when we're preparing that goal list, that, you know, go ready list of emergency food for our family, then we're having to purchase things that basically, I can't think of the word right now, but we're having to purchase things that are not that we don't refrigerate, for example. And when we look at all those things, when we look at the crackers, when we look at the tuna in the can or the chicken in the can, of those things that you might have on your list just in case you don't have power, those, non-perishables, thought about it. So when you're packing those things, and if you lose power, that's all you have. So then you start to recognize, you know, you don't have access to healthy food at that point and until the grocery stores start to open up again. And that's great for some of us. But for others of us, even when those grocery stores opened up, maybe we had not seen a paycheck because we get paid hourly and our business was closed. Help did not come in the form of being able to, maybe your car got flooded, so all of a sudden you didn't have a car to go to the grocery store. And if you did have a car to get to the grocery store, you didn't have funds to purchase the food. And for a lot of people in Houston-Harris County, that was the situation because they're living paycheck to paycheck already, and all of a sudden a storm or a natural disaster like Harvey comes along and it's even worse. So in terms of community resiliency, it makes the situation where some people in our community are more resilient because of access than others. And some of us, in terms of resilience, it's going to take a long time.
No, but I don't know how many of you are aware that HISD, I still want to say public schools, HISD opened up 9 feeding sites. I like to say proudly we're there before the Red Cross. And that's because our community said that. Community was breaking into our schools to try to get security. So we said, while they're there, we might as well feed them. And we opened up 9 sites, and absolutely, you know, forget my geography. We were up here, Old Ridge Parkway, we were down in Elrod. We were all over the city. We served 70,000 meals in 4 days. It was a community response from Harvey. But a lot of the things that she pointed out, and then our superintendent, our Board of Education made the decision that, as you said, no lights, no gas, no job. So we petitioned the TDA that we're feeding the people at no charge. Take the word free out of your lexicon. Somebody paying for this first. So it's no charge. Now, so all of a sudden it takes, maybe it take a little, there's just a little, avoidance of somebody giving you something. Somebody paying every end of the month. The USDA pays me. I don't know where this free comes from. So what we're doing now is feeding families at no charge. And the reason we did that, and we've seen it taper a little bit, because when families were dropping their kids to the school, that baby had to eat. That baby came out of a flooded house. So we were sort of like, I hope there's no USDA. We just sort of like, okay, put him in line. Just put him in line. If he can reach it, he can eat it, he can chew it, here, put him in line. So we're doing things like that in our breakfast program. The supper programs, I'm telling you right now, a lot of supper programs are shelter. Because there are still people, 5 and 6 families living in an apartment building. There are still people out there with no water, no gas, no paycheck. So what we're doing with what we can do with, and then I have to thank the philanthropic community here in Houston. Gosh, there's Lifetime Foundation, who owns Lifetime Fitness stuff, gave us first time, picked up a telephone, called them, they sent us $150,000. Whole Kids Foundation sent us $25,000 just for our employees. Of my 2,000 employees, we had 1,000 that were impacted. These are people who are making just above the minimum wage and not necessarily working 7 days a week. So we even, through our foundation, we have been raising money to take care of those needs. But it gets back to what the professor's saying and what my colleague here was saying. Why is it about money? Why isn't it that we could see this as a natural disaster? Like I told you, in Detroit, nobody cared. We had to make it. But this is a natural disaster. So they did do DSNAP. I don't know if DSNAP is still continuing. But there's going to be a real need for meals at no charge for the rest of the year. Because I got some families who may have 2 paychecks, but FEMA only gave them $20,000 on that house. And they need to put that house back together. So where do you think the money going to come from? There's going to be more kids, and Houston, we don't have lunch shaming. We just feed you, we figure out how we're going to pay for it later on. We don't do lunch shaming. Because lunch shaming is the highest form of institutional bullying that there is, and it's generated at the address, and it's carried forth into the school, over the school threshold, and then you get the most offensive person here is a lunch lady to actually do the dirty deed. So understand that. Understand what lunch shaming is all about. And we need to hold those communities and those parents responsible for that, not the little lunch lady. So there's a lot of things that we've done with Harvey in response to Harvey that we're going to carry out through the school year. And right now I want to make sure that the City of Houston Summer Feeding Program understand that the best lunch provider would be HISD, because we're not going to close down a week before school start. My behavior will be feeding kids till that Friday when school starts, opening that Monday, because hunger doesn't take a vacation. So we need to be doing that, and we need to, as a community, start demanding that we take care of. National food insecurity average in the country is 21%, and Harris County is 26%. Houston, you do have a problem. Oh, she's going to write about it, don't worry. Yeah, she got it, don't worry.
So I totally agree. We definitely have a food insecurity problem. We have a food desert problem. I've always been surprised. Although I'm a native Houstonian, I lived in the Northeast for 18 years, lived in Boston, Washington, D.C., great public transportation. We're the fourth largest city, and we have one of the worst transportations. It always just shocks me. We don't act like the fourth largest city in terms of transportation. So in order to solve the food crisis in our city, what would you tell policymakers where we need to focus? Do we need to focus more on the urban planning? Do we need to focus more on nutrition education? Where should we put our dollars? Should we put it more in early education, childcare, start them young? I don't think there is a right answer. I'm just curious on what your take would be. And it could be either a policymaker at the state level or even our current federal administration. Your choice.
Go ahead, Benina.
Well, I mean, at the federal level, I feel like for the time being, all we can hope to do is preserve the gains from the prior administration as best we can. You know, I don't feel like there's going to be any dramatic improvements, and you just want to hold the line on things like improved school food and menu labeling and better nutrition fact labels and all these things that were achieved during the Obama era. So, I mean, to answer your question, that's almost like beyond my pay grade to answer that question, but all of the above. I mean, I think we need to get to children early. I think that's so critically important. I think that nutrition education is critical. I mean, the lack of food literacy among our children, among Americans generally, is astonishing. I mean, we don't cook anymore, and we don't farm anymore. Like 2% of Americans now have some connection to a farm. So I actually read this statistic. I used it in a story. I hope it was true. That like 7% of Americans think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. I don't know if that's really true, but I mean, like, you know, we're that disconnected from our food supply, and like kids literally can't recognize where fruits and vegetables, you know, what they are. You'll hold it up, and they don't know what it is. So it just seems to me we're so fundamentally disconnected from food, from where it comes from how it's grown, from what it does for our bodies, that, you know, my personal area of interest is nutrition education. And, you know, Brighter Bites was mentioned. You know, programs like that where it's experiential. Kids are actually getting this food. It's being brought into their homes. Families are being taught. I mean, that's so critical that you're actually reaching the family, the food purchaser, the person preparing food. I mean, to me, efforts like that are so, you know, critically important.
I think, you know, in terms of policies, we got some good policies right now. I don't care about the current administration. All I want is a continuing resolution. So as long as they don't vote, Congress doesn't act, that's just fine with me. because that means that the dollars that we do have and the services that we do have will continue. I think things such as farm to school needs to be financed and financed at a higher level. The Food Service Modernization Act, which gives schools the equipment that they need in order to cook better food. Things like policy, breakfast commodities would help, because that would give us an extra 23 cents that we could put on those kids' trays. I think there needs to be something done with marketing to children. Can't they show a cartoon show without hooking a piece of food to it? I think one of the things that happened with the fast food market, if you'll look at it, is trying to get healthy again. But it's all hooked up to that French fry. We can get rid of the French fry, but they are offering some better selections. But I think in the arena of how we decide as Americans that we want to eat, we went to a process system because Mama just couldn't stand up and peel potatoes anymore and work as a corporate attorney. Not saying that, that's what you have. But, you know, those were the kind of choices that we were making. I'm telling you, as a mom, I know what was happening in my address. And then so they started making it cheaper. And we as Americans, why do we want everything cheap? Why is it? We'll pay $800 for an iPhone. Not a problem in the world. But somebody says you have to pay $1, 50 cents more a pound for clean labeled chicken. Oh my God, you're not going to do that. So where is our value systems, and how do we educate ourselves? Because we're the ones that's going to change policy. We demand a whole lot on our other non-food community. My car does everything for me except, and it's going to be doing that the next one, drive for me. But then I go into whatever my local market is, and I'll see a clean label, like, oh no, you know. So that's our value system. Changing how we do food, respecting our farmers, decorporatizing, decommoditizing our food system would go a long way. I think, you know, medicines or pharmaceuticals got a lot to do with it too. I can tell a kid I can take a pill and I don't have to eat, or I can tell a kid I can take a pill, I can eat all the junk I want, lose weight. All of that has corrupting influence. It's a big problem that we didn't get to overnight. We didn't get to here overnight. It's the manufacturers in a capitalistic society. Oh God, I didn't mean to say that. But they're responding to what we're asking them for. So look at yourself and decide in your community, in your church, in your school, or wherever you're at, in your mosque, or wherever you're at, where be your politics. What's your value system, and what are you going to demand that we have? You do that with these nice restaurants down here. You really do. I mean, you have some great restaurants, and the more local they say it is, the more you will pay. But then look at what I have to feed my children.
So I think when you ask that question, one of the things that comes to mind for me is advocacy. I think if you are in this room, you have a passion about something that we have talked about here today. And with that said, you know that our legislative process in Texas is every 2 years. So, you know, I think we cannot afford to not educate and aware and educate and actually make people aware of what's on the line and what's the importance of what's on the line when we start looking at things like, you know, recess, when we start looking at physical activity, when we start looking at some of the other things I think that Ms. Wiggins mentioned. So if nothing else, educate yourself and then educate others, and then encourage others to actually vote, encourage others to actually contact their legislative representatives for their particular area. It's something that I strongly believe in. It's something that if you are looking at prevention, this is a good way to begin that process and to engage that process. And when we know that we have a legislative process that occurs every 2 years, we can't wait until that time comes to then make that decision. That decision and some of those conversations and some of that educating ourselves needs to happen now, in preparation for that legislative session that's going to happen 2 years.
I would like to open it up to questions. I feel like we've been talking this entire time, and some of you probably have some burning questions for the panelists.
Very interesting panel. And it seems like a lot of the programs that were discussed is what I call maybe the supply side. That is, what programs can you develop to, in effect, make better food available. I wonder about the demand side, and particularly the discard rate on the part of children of different composite meals, whether they be what they might not deem to be the healthiest or those that are healthiest. Have you seen any changes in those regards on the demand side on the part of children?
Children and plate waste, big old topic. And the topic generally deals with the fact, imagine yourself, you're a 4-year-old, you got wobbly teeth to start with, and somebody puts a tray in front of you and gives you 20 minutes to eat. And you're in a classroom of 25 kids, I'll be generous. In Houston, what is it, 25 kids? It's 25? And you got 20 minutes to eat, and I'm a 4-year-old. First off, Miss Wiggins has $1.15 to put on your tray. So she gives you food that, so I'm buying from K-12, right? So I can't just be buying for these little fellas because a lot of them really need some organic toddler food, finger food, things they can handle. But I can't buy that food because I can't afford it. And they're throwing things away. They bite in an apple and it pulls out. We do more dental work. Biting an apple and it pulls out their teeth. Or we're introducing them to something that they can't handle, with this cheap fork. We're starting to invest more money in just utensils so they can handle the food. But I'm 4 years old. If I'm that first kid in that line, I got a pretty good shot of having 5 minutes to eat. But if I'm that last kid in that line, I don't. And so they come by, and the first thing that I do, because one of the things that I want to do here in Houston, I'm going to put it out there. I want to take off chocolate milk off a menu because, well, at least you're going to help me, right? When they come after me, you give me, please, I need your name. Yeah, I need your name. Because the first thing little children eat, and they're not eating it, is they drink their chocolate milk. That's the first, and somewhere people think chocolate milk is a food, it's not. And so what happens, little children do that. Little children also need finger foods. We need more money to buy those kind of things. So I'm working with my staff now. Instead of giving them diced carrots, we're going to give them carrot coins. That's their fingers. They're going to pick it up and put it in their mouths and the one next to them and whatever else. But at least they'll be consuming more of their food. We're starting to think about, full meat chicken nuggets that are tender and not dry. Stop giving them all this secret sauce. Stop, teaching our children that they can't eat something unless it's got a sauce on it. So those are a lot of things that are happening. Fresh fruits and vegetables, kids just don't know. In Michigan, we gave them asparagus. It took us 4 years. We started in kindergarten. By the time they were in 4th graders, they knew what asparagus tastes like, and they knew it was good. And they knew what purple plum tomatoes were, and they were good. So it takes time. But we have to, and all that stuff costs money. And a lot of that was because of fresh fruit and vegetable. We had, I did some stuff, but anyway, we had, that way we introduced food to children. But you got to do it over time. And stop putting sugar on it at home. If you stop putting sugar on their food, they wouldn't expect everything to be sweet.
I mean, one thing I would just add is, Betty's dealing with this on the front lines every day. She's putting out a meal and has to deal with plate waste. I think, culturally, we've created this category of like kid food. Like you go into a restaurant, you get the kids menu, and invariably it's the same 6 things, and they're breaded, and they're cheesy, and they're fried. And you go in the supermarket. I remember walking in the supermarket, and there's a big sign, children's yogurt. Think of how weird that would have been like 30 years ago. Like, why is the yogurt specially for kids? Well, it's just sweeter, that's all. So we've as a culture, really, weaned our kids on this very small subset of foods that are incredibly palate-pleasing. And so then, the carrot coins don't stand a chance. So I think what's going on in the lunchroom is critical, but also what's going on outside the lunchroom. We need to have some kind of cultural shift. It's not impossible. I mean, I sound like I'm this big booster of France, but they do have this interesting program where in their schools they're actually, teaching children to accept flavors. It's very important to their food culture, and it's part of their curriculum, and they start in preschool, and, it expands children's palates from the get-go. I'm not saying I don't see that happening in America, across the board, but things like that would be tremendously helpful to bolster these kinds of programs.
So I just want to mention, because you're talking about demand, and I think part of our role, and we have a lot of work to do, is paradigm shift. And it's getting kids to really, we talked about some of that work that Brighter Bites and Recipe for Success is doing right now, but there are others who our health department is doing for our health impact team. They also implement CATCH, coordinated approach to child health, which teaches kids about eating healthy and about fruits and about vegetables. And also Healthy Corner stores, which is actually under Healthy Living Matters and the Bill Health Challenge. But there's a brochure out at the back table if you want to see that. And it's going to these local independently owned grocery stores that are in communities and changing the setup of where fruits and vegetables are placed and exposure to certain fruits and vegetables for those who are actually coming to those grocery stores to purchase food. Another thing I think someone mentioned is about starting early in that paradigm shift, so teaching kids at a very young age in our early care and education and out-of-school time sector for Healthy Living Matters. You'll see that on the back table too, but if you go to our website, there's a call to action, and it really is an appeal to early care and education, like early child care professionals, to actually develop some policies and some protocols about some things in their child care settings, like about physical activity, about healthier food choices, and there's a host of other things on the list about the workers who are in the child care setting, setting up a model where they're eating healthier food too, so they become models for those kiddos when they come to the child care center. But with that said, all of these things are different ways to go about changing the culture, but we have a lot of work to do.
Briefly, I can say that, I'm getting ready to cost myself probably about $500,000 a year in snack sales. Snack sales. I know you love it. I look at this. There's something called a smart snack. Nothing smart about it. It's just a smaller size. So if we discontinue selling smart snacks, now that money, the parents are going to keep giving their kids some money now, Bettina, and they're going to come off campus. One of the reasons that we were having snacks is because this kept the kids on campus. And so what do you do with policies? And in Michigan, one of the things we did in Detroit at truancy was that a certain time of day kids couldn't go into stores around schools. So we need to start doing some actual work like that. We're trying to reduce smart snacks. I'm going to get so much pushback that I'm going to run for college. You're going to be right there with me. Okay. Of trying to reduce, because there's nothing smart about a snack. It's just smaller. We're looking at what we're calling now healthier, but they're going to cost more money. But again, it's changing the culture. Parents, poor people, unlike people think, like for their kids to have that extra too. So I was standing in a store. I live over in 3rd Ward, which is a really nice place. Really did a good job of. I live not far from here, and I was in a store one morning, and there was 2 teenage girls in the store with me. And they were on their way to school. And they had picked up, I don't know what it's called, it was more salt than anything. And then they had picked up a sugary drink. And so in our schools, we sell smaller portions, but we also sell juice. So I said to the young girl, I said, why are you buying that here? I mean, can't you get, oh no, that's fake food. The politics of this now has spilled over that I got kids standing in line telling me that my food is fake. Now, I can accept nasty. I'm used to nasty. But now it's fake. So the influence of what they're hearing on TVs and is now talking about has now spilled over. We have fake food. But that's not going to stop us. Chocolate milk, they might run me out of Houston. I like to have meatless Mondays. And
They'll run you out of Texas for that.
I'm going to get ran out of Texas. My staff is working now to try to figure out what we're going to call this so I can have it. But again, the snack program, I go into schools where I have parents who are just, you talk about demand, they're on me. Why are you serving this? Why are you serving that? And I say, okay, I won't serve it. Then you go to the front desk, and they got a candy sale. They got a candy sale going on. Or you go to a prominent high school, two of them, which you'll say names, stay nameless. Yeah, I better. Where they got contracts with outside restaurants. And they're competing with me for school meals. And they're demanding that your food needs to be healthy. And then I go and I look, and they're running restaurants. Or they're running turtles. I hate turtles. Don't ever buy any of them. Those caramely chocolate things. The kids are walking up and down the hall. But they're demanding that I have good food. So the marketing, the competition, they're using our children for economic means. Booster clubs are my favorite people because they don't care what they sell as long as I don't sell what they're selling. So there's, so we have to decide what we're going to do. The demand is there in their hearts. What did Jimmy Carter say? I looked it in my heart. The demand is there in their hearts, but what their behaviors show is completely different. So, I'm hopeful that we can change the standards because if we keep working with the kids, who is kids? Lisa helped me. I was with her kids. And wherever, Bright Advice, good lady. I'm with her kids, and her kids aren't asking for candy and stuff. They're asking for fresh fruits and vegetables. So she's changed something in her household. I said I can change, just like Lisa changed it in her household, I can change it in Juan's household and Tyrone's household and everything if we just keep putting it out there and putting it out there. And also, look at some of these independent grocers. Please look at, they have a larger selection of fresh fruits and vegetables than they used to have. Because the demand is out there and they're changing some of their behaviors.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that was such a beautiful illustration of that first question I think you asked, which is, is it the home or the school? And also just this need for a cultural shift. Betty's in this position where she legally can sell these Rice Krispie treats and the baked Doritos because they're smart snacks. Under federal regulations, they're now okay. But what message is that teaching kids as she's trying to serve the carrot coins and the purple peas and all the things we talked about? She can do it, and if she chooses not to, which is clearly the right thing to do for kids' health and for nutrition education, now she has to pay a financial price. So it's just, it's just a good illustration of the conundrum, really.
So I'm thinking about, in this day
with school gardens, that's interesting, but it's an avocation, and it's not going to have a commercial impact that you want to have. You know, maybe you can form cooperatives. One of the things that I happened, I stood there and I watched the market. Nobody gets into preservation. People don't know how to preserve food anymore. People don't know how. So you see a lot of stuff. I walk by the Bridget Garden. I'm like, oh my God, what, we do something with the tomatoes, make some fruit, do something. But people don't know how to do that anymore. So what you get is a very bunch of interested people. I had a pilot program in Detroit that I worked with my teenagers. I had an intergenerational program where seniors, retired auto workers, one of them happened to be my brother, who was 75 years old, who I got off his porch one day and said, you know how to farm, let's go work with these kids. And they had farm stands, and they would go around the apartment buildings, again, for the shed-ins. The whole other thing is that you'll find out a lot of people don't buy what they need to buy because they can't afford the packaging. I'm a senior citizen on a fixed income. I really would like to buy those squash. I don't need 3. But I got 3. And so there's food waste that go on with that, so I go back to the cans. I go back to do whatever we can, whatever I have to do. So those are the kind of things that we need to think about, food preservation. Now, I'm going to have to do something here that may upset anybody. Nutritional anthropology, I think my culture is carried through my food. One of the things that I really like about when I was in Detroit, I worked for the Jewish Welfare Federation. I used to go to the Passover meal. They would not eat that stuff but once a year. And that's the reason, and that's how they celebrate their culture. They celebrated who they were and what they're about. That's the way I feel about a chitlin. That's the way I feel. It carries our culture. So you're not going to sit there every day and eat a big pot of chitlins or a big pot of green. Now we're going to start cooking greens healthy and stuff. But don't deny the cultural relevance of your food and the importance of how it tells you who you are and what you are. I've learned to eat Ethiopian food and traditional foods and understanding people's culture and who they are and the importance of their food. So I get very upset with people who say, I don't eat a dirty pig. I'm not asking you to eat barbecue every day. I'm just asking you to recognize the importance of the role. Chicken schmaltz, I learned to eat that in the Jewish culture and what relevance it had. Not they sit there every day and eat it, but understand the celebration. Remember, food also celebrates who you are and what you are. And what they're doing now in the African American community now is learning that you don't even have to have smoked turkey in greens. You could actually saute them in a little olive oil, put a little garlic on them. It's the same. So that, but the other things you're talking about, until we commercialize it, it's not. I'm trying to do farm to school. There's not a farmer in Texas that can raise enough produce for me to serve one round of those 350,000 meals I serve every day. But we can start making that economic impact. I'm still going to have to get stuff out of Washington and Arizona and stuff. Gosh, community gardens, I swear by them. I swear by them because in Detroit, I figured that was one way to use up all that vacant land that we had. But what happens is, remember, a school garden is only as good as the community in which they serve. So one of the things I started in Detroit, and I'm not going to bore you with it, go Google Detroit School Garden Collaborative. And understand it was a focus on school garden, but it was made of people like you, and I had university, I had healthcare, I had not-for-profit, I had the food bank. We all worked together, and we would sit down and figure out what role school gardens would play. We had school gardens when I had Cookie Matters, which was handled through the food bank. I had, oh God, I haven't been only gone for a few months. Food recovery, to do the things that Brighter Bites was doing. Where they would come into my school and deliver produce. But we work collaboratively together to come up with a food solution and not in silos. We had our food rescue. I would do rescue at the end of the year, the holidays, and they would come and get food. So school gardens are only as good as the community, and I would have principals had to sign a contract to say they would provide us with a teacher, and that teacher would have to go to training, and they would have to pay that teacher. In exchange, we gave them garden beds and seeds and a support team. You can't do it by yourself. That's how I figure it was a community response. Look up Detroit School Garden Collaborative. I'm real proud of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. School gardens are a great idea, but the sustainability of a school garden is very difficult. So there's been a lot of research projects that have placed school gardens in schools, but once that research project is gone, if you don't have a teacher that is assigned to the garden, if you don't have the funds to maintain the garden, it becomes just a pile of weeds. So it really is a school/community effort to maintain that garden over time.
The kids are eating out of gas stations in the summertime. I've been feeding you school breakfast, school lunch, fresh 3-5 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables, yogurt. It can go on and on and on. What makes you think? I have 1,078 opportunities. Well, that's at my school calendar. I don't know how many it's used. At least a minimum to feed that child. That parent does not have to spend that money. If you look at a school meal, I can give that kid, if he eats breakfast, lunch, and supper, he'll get 24 ounces of low-fat milk. He'll get 5 ounces of low-fat protein. He's getting whole grain bread, 5 slices of whole grain bread. He's getting 4 or 5 servings of fruit that the school district paid for, not the parent. What makes you think on the last, what makes people think, and that makes me angry, on the last day of school when I let that kid go, where I've been feeding that parent, just thinking the dollar signs, I had to figure it out one day, it's $8 a day that we're supplementing that parent groceries 5 days a week. That's $40 per child. What makes you think on the last day of school that all of a sudden they got $40 to feed that kid all summer? What makes you think that? See what that kid's going to get all summer? Particularly if he's low income, it happens better when there's money available in the household. He's not going to even get real Frosted Flakes. He's going to get that off-brand Frosted Flakes. He's not going to get juice. He's going to get Tampico. He's going to drink Kool-Aid. He's going to get not even my Smart Snacks that are smaller. He's going to get some sort of junk. And oh, by the way, he may not get milk every day because as the payday runs down to Friday, he's going to have water or juice or something else with that cereal that he's eating. They don't turn, how about that household where they didn't have any meat? And there's 5 or 6 families living. Get real. That's the reason. Go track that child and see what his eating experience is from the last week in May until the last week in August. That's the reason they're gaining weight. And he's not going, and guess what? In Detroit, we had no recreation department for 3 years, so there was no summer activity for him to swim and jump and run. So he was sitting in the house with no electricity, either playing cards or they had something, they were doing this all summer. With some electronic game.
So I would say, just to sort of piggyback on what Ms. Wiggins has said, there are several factors to consider. One of those factors is decreased physical activity adds to that. In addition to that, increased screen time. There are several feeding programs. If you go through Harris County Public Library and also Houston Public Library, they always advertise where feeding programs are being offered throughout Houston and Harris County for the summer. But then there's those other issues to consider, because just like she talked about, parents don't find that additional funding to provide more foods for kids that are going to be at home during the summer. They also still work during the summer. So several parents are not at home, and, you know, kids are at home. So it goes back to what's being purchased, what's being prepared in the home during the summer, but there are, you know, some programs that are available.